Visioning Process. When we started this, we talked about how we were going to spend several months. Can everybody, please, just so that we can go through, we have a lot of slides to go through tonight. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Vivian Brady-Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of the Jersey City Housing Authority. And we are at the third phase of our visioning process. We are being live streamed. And as always, the materials from this session, as well as the live stream, will be available on our website, currently live streaming on Facebook. I also want to take a moment to recognize Reginald Jones, who happens to be a member of our Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
Many of you already know him. Very pleased to have Commissioner Jones with us this evening. Thank you. We also have members of our team at Jersey City Housing Authority. So we're here at the third session. And what we're going to do tonight is begin to look at, based on the feedback that you provided for the first two sessions, the different types of options available to us as we begin to narrow the choices. So we're going to turn this over to JCHA and Claudia Bitra of Kitchen and Associates, the multi-service design firm, which we have commissioned to help us refine the vision before we go out for an RFP process. So I'm going to turn it over to JCHA and Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello again. So who's here for the very first time? So that we have a couple first timers, okay? Who's been to all the other two? Both of the others, okay? And the rest of you have been to one or the other of these. Right. As Vivian was saying, the process that we have here, we have 5 meetings that are being scheduled out. We're right here today. We're in the middle. The first meeting that we had, we got a lot of feedback from you. The second meeting that we had a lot of stations around, and we got some very specific input on things about what you really liked about Holland Gardens, about the neighborhood, and some very specific feedback about what you didn't like and what you wanted to see going forward. Go back.
Steve, we might need you just to project. I know that you're having problems with Holland.
To just project. Is that better?
No, it's just starting we got a whole
So it's
thing,
coming in and
like you
out.
were saying.
It doesn't work when I do it over here, right? Okay. So we're in the middle of this process, and I think the mic goes in and out too. We're in the middle of the process, and tonight what we're going to be doing is recapping what your goals are, what we've heard your goals are, and then talking about different approaches to density and how we would approach which of those approaches are going to be most likely to get the most impact and do the most good for the things that you guys want. So we're here, we're going to recap what we heard in the open house and then talk about those development approaches. So last time we were asking very specific questions about the neighborhood. We had some great artwork from and some feedback from some of the kids. So one of the first things we talked about and what we learned, because before we can design, the first thing we have to do is learn, because we don't live here, you guys live here. So we learned some pretty interesting things about, what is your neighborhood. And while some people define your neighborhood just as the block of Holland Gardens, most people were looking well beyond to the city at large, and certainly green spaces like Hamilton Park and down along the water as being some of the favorite aspects and some of the unique things that if you live here in Holland Gardens, you can take really advantage of. But yeah, I don't know if you had other insights on that.
Yeah, well, just to reinforce, for those of you who didn't come to last month meeting, the map that you see here is a map that we worked together with most of you. So the orange dots were dots that were placed by residents on the areas of the city that are really important for you. For places you work, education, medical services, and things like that. And what I think is really nice to see about this is that your neighborhood is a lot more than just the area that we talk about, not only Holland Gardens, but everything north of 14th Street. But we have a lot of areas that are really important.
Yeah.
Starting with the schools that are around Hamilton Park, where most of the kids go to, with the areas where you have access to transit in other parts of the region. Medical services were really important, so we wanted to make sure that everybody, bring everybody up to date on what we heard, because this is the beginning of the conversation about where we go from here.
So, again, a couple things that we heard. I'm gonna stand over here. I'm gonna drive you crazy with the live stream. When we ask for your feedback, again, these dots are all dots that people here, residents, prioritize as the best things. In this case, the question is the best thing about living in the neighborhood. And the number 1 and 2 was basically schools, and your home. You feel safe here. It's better here at Holland Gardens is to improve the housing, better housing, and also better transit. Being able to make connections and get around better, because getting across the highway is not the easiest thing in the world. So those two really jumped out. While there's a lot of different attributes that some people like, it was very clear that in a vision for the future, if we improve the housing and we improve the transit, we're going to do the most good for the most people. This exercise, if you were not here, was not one where people were just putting dots. This was where people were writing suggestions down and putting them on Post-its. And we then interpret all those suggestions. And they come down to a couple of basic things. The things that are liked the most are the safety, the feeling of being safe in your homes here at Holland Gardens, and the location. That's very consistent with some of the other about the favorite places, because folks were very demonstrative about, we really like being here at Holland Gardens. It's connected to a lot of places. It's in a great location, and there really is not a sense of crime. There's not, every place has some challenges, but almost everybody is saying, I feel safe in my home. And that's a great thing to capitalize on. But the change, this goes back to the better housing, the unit sizes, the sizes of the apartments, the sizes of the rooms in the apartments, and the layout of the apartments. Let's face it, Holland Gardens is an older facility, so they were not designed to current standards. So the most things that people really wanted to see changing was the quality of the housing, and that basically comes down to bigger and better. All of these things, if you look at it, I want more storage, I want bigger rooms, I want to be able to put better furniture in my apartment. That's bigger. And then it had to do with, I want plumbing that doesn't leak. I want the finishes that are better than what I have. So that's better. So bigger and better is what came out there. You want to take this one? By the way, we're going to rotate on and off tonight because I am getting over a cold, so I can only talk about so much.
Okay, so then the next round of questions that we had at the meeting was related to what kind of amenities we would like to see in the future development. And the question was, can you pick 3 amenities out of this list of several, going from shops and restaurants to fitness rooms to parking, elevators, daycare, laundry. Everybody went through that exercise, and you see the yellow dots are the places or the amenities that were selected by people. And when you count the dots and you go through that, you realize that the three most important amenities that residents would like to see in a future development would be parking, a fitness room, and a laundry room. That is very interesting, and we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking through the details of parking and community amenities in general. But it's also important to take a look at other aspects that were highlighted, from a community space for senior residents to elevators, a building with an elevator so that you don't have to go up and down on steps all the time, daycare, play areas for children. But again, we wanted to focus on the areas that were primarily selected. And so when we focus on parking, for example, we wanted to understand when people say we need more parking, how much parking there is there, and why is it a problem? So I'm going to start, but maybe you want to add to that. So we learned that we have about 50 parking spaces for the entire development. So you have a small lot, and then you have right up against the development, you have about 30 spaces. Altogether, we have 51 spaces. So we have 192 units and 51 spaces. That doesn't seem to be enough. That's what we heard. Does anybody have a comment on that, or something, some additional concern? Or some additional concern on that? On the parking topic?
What about business?
I'm sorry?
We need more parking spots.
Right. So right now, we have one parking space for every 4 units. That's not enough, because not only is not enough for the residents, but it's also not enough for people when they come to visit you. And so the idea of like, we need more parking, how do we approach that in those different scenarios that we will discuss a little later?
I have a question about parking.
Yes.
And would it be free parking or would you be charging?
The question was whether the parking would be free or not. The parking currently is free, and it would be intended to remain free, and what a future vision would be. One of the other things that we heard about parking was that besides just having the 51 spots on site, there are some around the site. However, with the other development that's come into the neighborhood, a lot of folks from the new tower tend to park and to take up those spaces that used to be available for Holland Gardens residents, but because they're public spaces, they're not private and reserved for Holland Gardens, there seems to be less parking inventory on the street as well. Because if you live in the towers and you choose not to pay for your parking, as what you were just saying about paying for parking, some people maybe want to pay for the apartment, but they don't want to pay for the parking. So what that does, that may be all well and good for them, but what it's doing is putting pressure on the parking in the neighborhood. And now, what had been 51 cars for Holland Gardens plus the neighborhood is being squeezed, and you guys are feeling it. That's one of the things that we heard.
There was another question about parking in
Yeah,
here.
I was gonna say that, about how much did they charge for them parking there when they're using all the street? You cannot even go out on Sunday or Saturday, but if you come in your car, and we have only 51 parkings available, we're trying to look, and sometimes we park so far away, but they don't wanna pay for the parking space, so they took it out. All those cars don't even belong to people that live around here, just them.
That's correct.
Are you saying that they're parking on the grounds? Because if that's the case, that's part of the office. Office should-
No, I'm not saying that they're parking on the grounds of Holland Gardens. I'm not saying that they're taking up those spaces that are on the ground. But Holland Gardens only gets on the grounds is this one lot and these cars that are along the one edge. The rest of things that are along this edge and along that street, that's all public parking. That's public right of way. Anybody has the right to park there. So it's not whether it's right or wrong. It's simply that one of the things that we heard was that there's more demand for street parking as the area around you gets developed. And that's something that's starting to be felt here by residents.
In the back.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one thing about the parking. I'm James, I'm a councilman here. We passed a law at the city council level to make this a residential only zone for the street parking. So the folks in the towers will, starting in July, be ineligible to park on the city streets right around here. It hasn't been implemented yet, which is why all the concerns you're hearing are valid, but we did pass the law in October and we implemented it in July.
Is that going to be a sticker type of thing or a permit type of thing?
Yes, and I can clarify with more details for everybody who might have questions, not during this meeting, because that's an aside, but I just wanted to clarify.
Well, that's actually worthy of a round of applause, I would think. Yeah, because that shows that even while we're thinking in the future, there are some steps that are being taken in the here and now to help relieve what is one of the painful things. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, in the air quality, the ventilation, we have no vents in the middle of the remote.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you to hold that, that's a question about an indoor environment. I'm going to ask you to hold on to that because we're going to get there in just a second. So, we'll get there. Whether the mic comes with us or not, I don't know, but we're going to get there in just a second. Okay, that's shifted.
Okay, so another topic that, if you remember the three elements, the three amenities we talked about was parking, a fitness room, and a laundry room, right? So now we're talking about the laundry room and the fitness room. They all fall in the category of common areas, of amenities that serve all the residents in common areas. And what we wanted to look at here is how much common space does Holland Gardens have today compared to what you would like to have? And when you talk about additional common areas, does the space that we have today accommodate what you would like to see? So the blue spaces you see here are the two community spaces that exist today in Holland Gardens. And we have about 1,800 square feet of community space, including the room that we are using right now, and some of the spaces that you have in other buildings. In general, to accommodate the kinds of programs that we talked about, to have a fitness room, to have a computer center, to have a laundry room, and some other amenities that serve every resident, you would need a lot more than 1,800 square feet. You need somewhere around 3,000 or 3,500 square feet of space. And just to give you a notion of scale of comparison, while the blue is Holland Gardens, this pink area is the ground floor of one of the buildings at Gloria Robinson. So you are familiar with Gloria Robinson, most of you know the project. That was a new project that included on the ground floor some additional community space that includes a very large community room, maybe 2 or 3 times the size of this space, with a multi-purpose space where you would have the ability to have either an arts and crafts or a computer center or whatever program makes sense for the community in general. A fitness room that would fall in that category, and some additional accessory spaces. Yes.
I don't mean no harm, but you had daycare center as number 4 or 5. Since when does the daycare center? First of all, community center, I think you should devote more time to a senior citizen center, for the senior citizens specifically. Where on these grounds is there a daycare, a play area for the children? We don't need no fitness school. What we need is a daycare and a big old space for the children to play.
And
Fitness center.
right.
I'm just opposed to the fitness center, I'm putting it out there, because I think that we can use that space for more, things such as a daycare center and a place for these kids to play, not no parking lot, but a bigger space. Now, community laundry room, okay, that's debatable, but some of us cannot afford to go to the laundromat that's down the street. I got that. I got that, but a community center, nowhere are we doing something for a senior center, if anything, or maybe a senior center to be incorporated into the community space. I haven't heard nothing about the seniors or the kids. Or if it is, then there seems to be less
Right.
on the list, and I don't understand that.
So you're probably not one of the people who put the yellow dots on the fitness room or the laundry room. And that's perfectly fine.
I didn't get one of those surveys, I'm sorry. I never got one. I did go for the second meeting. But then, okay, but then for the people who didn't make it, why don't you just put something in their mailbox? Or like a sign, hey, come see so and so.
So,
I'm just saying.
So just to cover the topic, like for those of you who were not here on at the second meeting, it doesn't mean that your input is not considered. What we're discussing here is the fact that among the priorities for residents are common areas. If it's going to be a fitness room or if it's going to be a daycare, that's something that we will discuss further down when we start talking about the details of the program. But the big message that we got that day was that we need more common areas in general. And how we program those areas, it could be a fitness room, it could be a computer center, it could be a daycare.
Okay.
Right. But the big message is that whatever we have here now is not enough compared to what we would like to have. In the future, that is a lot more than just one community room and maybe a second room that serves for the community every now and then. Because the program we're talking about is expanding in size and in complexity, to have computers, to have a daycare, to have a fitness room. So we're talking about bringing the 1,800 square feet, which is what we have now here in Holland Gardens, to maybe 2 times the amount of space or even more. And for that, that brings to the conversation when we start talking about what's next in general.
Okay, so before this, I know one voice I can project. Before this meeting kind of gets out of hand, as you can hear, I have some angry residents out there, and these are their concerns. I don't know who can answer this question or even address this situation. My residents are upset. They feel as though they're just being thrown under the bus. In the redevelopment, they feel as though they don't have a choice. Now, I was told, and I've been telling them, that they do have a choice, because this is what the mayor said. This is what Ms. Vivian Phillips said. So I'm going by what was told to me and my residents, and they're still upset. They feel as though going through these charrettes, the place is still going to be knocked down. They don't feel as though they have a say so. So you have a couple of angry people sitting here. I'm just trying to diffuse the situation, okay? Because they're sitting here, they're angry. They just feel like they're being, oh, we doing charrettes. That means we don't have a say so. What are we going to do this for? This is what I'm dealing with. So I feel as though before we move forward, this needs to be addressed, because your meeting is going to get out of control. And I'm trying to diffuse the situation because I want us to have a good meeting. But I represent them. You understand me? I represent you, and I have to speak for you. You understand me? And that's what I'm going to do. Even if I didn't agree, but I represent you all. So, y'all put me to the corner. When y'all put me to the corner during the meeting, I have to address this. So I need this to be addressed by someone who can actually give them a solid answer and reassure them that they still have the option to say, no, we won't go, or yes, we'll let you redevelop and blah, blah, blah. They still have to even have an option.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how they feel. That's how they feel. It's a problem. It's a problem.
You want to take it?
And I will let you follow up.
What's up? Okay. Vivian's gonna take it because she matters a whole lot more than we do.
I am the executive director of this agency, and what I can tell you is that we have come in good faith. We started this project back in January. We committed to everyone in this room an opportunity to do charrettes. We paid good money to do this work. We would not have invested in this work if we did not come in good faith. And what this team is telling you is what you told them. Now, some of you, because coming to consensus, even among yourselves, may be something that takes some work. Some people want senior center. Some people are gonna be focused on daycare. Some people will say, you know, I want more parking, but not at the expense of more community space. Doing a redevelopment or even a rehabilitation, which we're gonna talk about tonight, is not easy work. It is about making choices that are going to last for decades. So we could have done something else. We could have just said, we're gonna do whatever we want, but instead, we spend a night here every month, and we work with this fine firm, and we spend time canvassing you. I know that you have a lot of skepticism, you don't trust, and all I can say to you is, the proof is in what we're doing. We spent the money to do this because we invested in this community. If we didn't think it was important, we would have simply said, we want to do this, right? But we haven't done that, and I ask that you listen to these folks. We're not anywhere near where we need to be to make a decision. So, you can come back, all of this is public. This is not the only time that you get to see these documents. You can pull them down, you can pull down the tapes from meeting number 1, meeting number 2, this meeting and the future. So I think that's an important thing to understand. We have tried, and I believe very strongly in transparency, but I believe that proof is in actions. And I think that our actions thus far as an agency have been above board with the resident council and with the people in this room. That is all I can tell you, that I come in good faith, and so do all of the staff members, and I know the resident council when we work with them and this firm. I ask that you give them the attention they merit and deserve so we can work through this. No decisions have been made, and none will be made this night.
Thank you.
Thank you. One of the other things that I'd like to simply remind you of it as well is this, and we talked about this in the very first meeting that you were here. Most of the time, when this kind of planning happens, what happens is the housing authority engages a developer, and the developer pays for this process. In that case, very often there is a preferred outcome, one that makes sense for the developer. And that's one of the first things that we heard in meeting number 1 was, we don't want a developer to come in and push us around. We don't want a developer to come in and push us out. The housing authority took an extraordinary step because public housing authorities don't have a whole lot of resources. But rather than doing the easy thing that most would do and have a developer come in and do this, they chose to do it themselves so that they had control of the process, so that you have control of the process. So again, what we're saying tonight is not necessarily, this isn't the housing authority's opinions, this isn't our opinions. This is simply what those residents who came to the prior meetings, and this is the background to this, to then talk about what directions make sense.
So why not supply more resources so that people will not be ignorant to what's going on? A lot of people may not understand the wording that's being used and things of that nature. So when they did, agree to certain things, they may not have even known what they were agreeing to.
Well, nobody has agreed to anything yet. There's not been any, well, all that we've done thus far is simply ask to get your feedback and your experiences about what you like here at Holland Gardens and what you don't like. That's all that we've asked. And all that we've been talking about tonight is not what we said, but it's what we've heard everyone here and those that showed up at prior meetings.
Regarding that, I have a few points. One would be what you guys are saying and what she had said earlier. Is this the first time it's being done by housing controlling the art versus getting the developer to come in, contract, and work force into what they decide versus you doing it where we control what happens and it benefits us in the end?
This is the first time that the housing authority has approached it this way. In other situations, we've had a particular grant, and there's been a developer who's been part of that grant process. So depending on what happens, there will likely be a developer involved, but at this stage, we are coming to you before any developer has been chosen so that we can develop the request for proposal, and this is unique.
Okay, so with that being said then, this is something that it's first time we're treading those waters.
It is.
And we'll pretty much be the example if this goes accordingly, correct? Okay, everyone's fears.
Absolutely. I've said before that this really is a unique kind of situation. And it's one that the housing authority is looking carefully at, and frankly, other housing authorities are looking at the situation to see if the outcome is different than it is when the developer leads it. So, yes, your feedback is gonna have a major impact on whatever direction and vision Holland Gardens takes. But it's also gonna have a lot of impact
Patience.
on others.
And it's patience and based on our involvement, correct?
Yeah.
And I state that because a lot of people want things done yesterday. And I understand the frustration because we've had people that have gone through this scenario in other locations and relocated here. So I can constantly understand they're at the breaking point of this is gonna happen again to me and walk away.
Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, as a person in relocation, this never happened. Okay, so I've been
No, but
relocated,
this is the first
and
time.
this is the first time this has ever
That's why, so
happened.
to
And I'm gonna tell you
understand.
as a person that was in a relocation, because it didn't happen like that before.
No, to
They
make those
did us with the
people,
blueprints, boom, 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 we coming in, give you a date, you gotta be out, we relocated, and that's how it was like.
and to make those people understand that came to this meeting and they want fast answers, need to understand that this is the first of what we're doing and
That's one of the reasons why we make sure that people know that it's a 6-month long process. And even that's a short process to do this well. 6 months long allows people to come in and out of the process. And if they miss one meeting, as some of you here have missed one meeting, it doesn't mean that your opinions don't count. It means that they come in at a different point in time. And we test those against things that we've heard from others. And sometimes they will align, sometimes they will give us something brand new. And that way, over a period of time, that can shape the direction. That's what we're trying, and tonight we're going to be talking about different directions that we can get into. But before we can get there, we kind of got to go through some of the things that we have heard. So we're almost done with that part, so.
no, we appreciate your time and understanding, just, I guess, because everyone else is frustrated. And like you said, when you miss a meeting, you're kind of left behind in the loop, so.
It's not only frustration, it's fear.
Yes.
It's a lot of fear.
Fear.
There's a lot of fear going on.
And I understand, nobody's upset when people express their opinions. We really are not. We are not,
I know the housing authority is not, because fears are real. And they're things that you live with, and you can't be comfortable if you're fearful. The whole purpose of taking this particular process is to be more transparent and to be less intimidating and less pushing people around so that your fears can be lessened. And at the end of the day, there will be a vision. Even that vision won't be a final decision. There will be a goal. There will be a direction that you will have told the housing authority which way we want to take Holland Gardens. That's the purpose here. It's not to say we're gonna do this. What you're gonna do is you're gonna say, of all the things we talked about, that's the best thing that's gonna get us the most of what we want. And housing authority, we want you to help us work to get there. We don't want you to stop here. We don't want you to go back there. We want you to go where the goal is. That's the purpose of visioning. It's not to make any final decisions, but together we will decide things. And frankly, tonight, one of the things that we're going to talk about is renovation. What can we do with a renovation? There are things that we can do with renovation. There are frankly things that we can't do with renovating the existing buildings. And everybody in this room knows that. But we're going to walk through that and say, okay, is that enough? I suspect that when you go through some of the options, you may say that, we we can do better than that. And that may be a goal that you want to point the housing authority at, say, no, we want better than that. So let's keep going.
Is this like the last one of these? Okay. So, one of the last questions that we asked was, inside the apartment itself, just inside the apartment, not the neighborhood, not all around, but in the apartment, what is the most important stuff? And not surprisingly with some of the other things, the size of the apartment, bigger, was clearly the number one thing, the overall size. But here's where some of the other things that people have talked about. Things like natural light ventilation, things like being able to control the temperature, heating and air conditioning. Right now, the whole complex is on a central loop. If one goes out, everybody feels the pain. And being able to take better control. Things like the ability to open the window and not smell the fumes. You do smell a lot of fumes in certain places with your certain exposures. When the traffic backs up going into the tunnel, there's just a lot of car fumes around. There were also concerns about repairs, how long they take, how hard they are, how well they last. Things like lead paint and other environmental concerns. Those are all things that were talked about in terms of the units. But a lot of the things that we would like to see are bigger and better. Things like air conditioning, maybe some appliances, washer and dryer in my unit, so I don't actually have to go to a laundromat. Maybe do laundry in my unit. One of the key things here is the option to stay in my home if I wind up having a disability. If I can't make it up the stairs, and absolutely every person who lives at Holland Gardens has to go upstairs. If you can't go upstairs, there are no handicap accessible units here. There's nothing that's on a flat. So either you need help getting up those stairs, or then you are at risk of possibly having to find a different place that doesn't have stairs. And as people get older, my beard's getting grayer every day. As you get older, the stairs get harder. And if you're thinking in the future and you want to stay in this great location, you have to be mindful that the buildings here, the units here, being small and all up on stairs, some up several flights of stairs, that those two things don't really mix well. So, in terms of the sizes, and we're going to go through this really, really quickly because we've got other work to do here. It's not surprising to us when you say the units are too small, because we can tell how big your units are. We've got the plans for the units. If this is a one-bedroom unit at Holland Gardens, it's 460 square feet. When we look at an appropriate size for an apartment unit, there are things that we look at. The minimum standard that we look at is what affordable housing standards are now. And that says HMFA standard, that stands for the New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency. HUD has standards, but those are like the minimums. Right now, a one-bedroom apartment at Holland Gardens is 460 square feet. A typical one-bedroom by current day minimum standard is 650 square feet. That's almost 200 square feet bigger than what you've got now. Nobody is surprised that you're feeling cramped in your apartments. What you should have by current minimum standards is a full kitchen, full living and dining area, a big bedroom with a closet, a laundry in the unit, and a handicap accessible bathroom. That's a typical one-bedroom apartment in what is built new by minimum standards today. So I say this basically to reinforce that you're not crazy, you know small, you know that you can't get furniture into 460 square feet is barely a studio apartment these days.
Why they build so small back then? Like, what was the purpose?
Because the standards today and the standards back in the, what was this, 1940?
Everything was really only this site.
The-
Other sites I come from, they were much bigger than that.
Yes. Whatever the standards were back then, before, hopefully before anybody in this room was born, I know it's before I was born, you know,
He ain't even right.
they were just very small. I don't know exactly why that was the case, but it was very compact, very small, and we have seen this in some other public housing sites. We're gonna go quickly, just so that you get a sense that it's not just the one-bedroom apartments. The 2 bedrooms at Holland Gardens are 640 square feet. Again, it's about 200 square feet less than the minimum standard. And when I say minimum, that is the minimum. Many times, 2-bedroom apartments could be 900 or 1,000 square feet.
Yes.
You know, that, especially if you get like a 2-bedroom townhouse type of apartment, something like that. They are much bigger. 3-bedroom apartments, you're at 740 square feet for 3 bedrooms. Basically, what they did at Holland Gardens when it was originally designed was they got the same kind of kitchen and the same little living space, and they just added these small bedrooms along. So it's 740 square feet. That's not even enough size for a 2-bedroom apartment by today's standards. Today's standard is 1,150 square feet. That's now 300 square feet bigger. And 100 square feet, just so that you know what 100 square feet, when I talk about that, that's a room that is 10 by 10. That's like a bedroom. That's 3 bedrooms too small. You know, anybody ever see the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, but his heart was several sizes? That's how your apartments are now. There's several sizes too small. So, and I know there's some 4 bedrooms here as well, but the same things apply. So you need to keep this in mind when you also think of what we heard, which is bigger and better. Some things just don't necessarily work together again. Okay, so we go. This is the last one before we get into the other. Okay. So these are some other things. We simply document them so that they're part of the documents for the process. Other things that we heard that are important in a vision. Things like addressing the aging infrastructure and the impact of flooding. We know that Holland Gardens lies in a bit of a low spot. And the infrastructure is the city infrastructure, the sewer system and things like that. That is getting strained by all the other stuff that goes on around us as well. And Holland Gardens is right at the low point. So Holland Gardens feels the pain more than anybody else in this whole area. So that's just one of the things that we have to look at, because that goes not just to the housing authority, it goes to the city as well. But designing to be sure we're resilient against flooding, so we're not in danger when flooding happens. Talking about things that are environmentally sensitive and green. I talked a little bit previously about minimizing noise, because we live here in a pretty noisy part of the town with all the traffic. So being able to breathe clean air and not constantly have the buzz of traffic in our ears.
Also, before you move on past environmental, I remember requesting that you get some EPA reports. Because I know that we do, the ground soil and groundwater at one point was contaminated with all the gas stations around. We used to get EPA reports when we moved down here, to the EPA reports every 6 months. So I'm just wondering if it's still really bad and why would we, without it being.
So the question is, has the housing authority done any recent EPA or environmental testing? And frankly, I don't know the answer to that. Vivian or Steve might know the answer.
I requested them.
We haven't done, I believe, the water testing. We've done unit by unit, lead and mold. But I don't know, I think the EPA talks, you're talking about like citywide. We can reach out to Suez or anyway for that.
Okay. Other things that we talked about were keeping energy conserving, so that whatever is done doesn't cost too much to operate, especially if we're we're doing air conditioning as well. So dealing with water, dealing with energy, dealing with also, and this goes to the connectivity to things in the neighborhood, you know, the view corridors in New York and the Palisades, accessing public spaces and parks and things like that. These are all documented and things that we have not forgotten here. So, now we're going to talk a little bit differently with that, and that's all the background of the things that you want, okay? You should have gotten a handout that looks like this. We have it back here in both Spanish and English, because I know that nobody sitting out there can actually read what's written up here. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through this together, and we're gonna talk about different approaches to development, different approaches to density, and how many of the things that we want. These are all listed down here, these priorities. These are taken from that stuff that we just talked about. They represent the checklist, if you will, of things that we'd like to see. And the idea is to go through several different approaches and see which one of these or two of these approaches is going to get us the most of what we want. And if there's an approach that doesn't get us a whole lot of anything, then we shouldn't be spending a whole lot of time on that. Okay? We all on the same page? So the first thing that we want to do is talk about rehabilitation, renovation. So that's basically, when we say rehabilitation and renovation, there are actually two approaches to this. The first one is the simplest approach. Basically, take what's here, the buildings that are here, invest money into them so that they can be fixed. Fix what's broken. So what you want to do is, whether it's roofs or plumbing or kitchens or appliances and things like that, find the money to put into them so that Holland Gardens basically stays as close to what it is now, but it's better. It's newer. So what you would need to do is do things that will extend the building life for approximately 20 years, upgrade them. Now, there are certain things that whenever you improve a property, you're gonna have to do. Not because I say so, but because the law says so. If you're going to come into a property like this and invest money in it, there are certain code upgrades that need to be done. One of those is to make a certain number of units handicapped accessible. Well, on the one hand, that's good. That's good because that fear of not having units that don't require steps. On the other hand, you saw how big the units are. Handicapped accessible units are even bigger than those minimum standards. They have to be so you can get wide doors, you can move wheelchairs around, and things like that. This is not very difficult. It requires more space. In the context of existing buildings, if you take a unit and you make it bigger, that means you're going to lose something. And what the thing that you'll lose is the number of units that are here. One of the things that we heard very early on is we have 192 units here. At the end of the day, we want 192 units back. But if for every accessible unit that you make, you lose one, and let's say you need 10 accessible units, you may have to lose 10 units. Because just fixing the existing buildings, there's no expansion room. So there would be some unit loss, not a lot, but some. Question.
So, if we find out, I'm getting a little bit about construction. So we find out that the foundation is not acceptable to a rehab, there couldn't be no rehab, right? How do we know that the foundation is strong enough after all these years to even be rehabbed at all? That would be a waste.
So you're asking a great question, but I would say it's a question that comes next. Because Whether or not it makes sense to rehab it is really the next thing. Once we
I'm
decide.
saying that because we're speaking about it, and I feel as though if it's really not, why would we waste our time talking about it if it can't really be that.
And we're spending the time talking about rehab because we said together that we're not going to make any presumptions. We're going to look at every option. What you're saying is absolutely true. To put money into these buildings, you're not going to get as much return back. Because while you can put money in to fix things up, your undersized units are still going to be undersized. Your undersized kitchens are still going to be undersized. You will still not have laundries in your apartments because there's no room for that. The very fact of the matter is, if you fix what's here, it's primarily a fixed version of what's here. Okay? The next one. Go back one. Back one. There we go. And one other variation on rehab. So one is basically fix what's here. The other is leave the basic bones of the building. Leave the structure and the exterior wall, but take the units and wipe them out. And just do a gut rehab. If you do a gut rehab, you can come back in with units that are different. It's not just fixing what you've got now, they're different, they're bigger, could be bigger. But what happens if you leave the walls and the roof and the bones of what we've got, we wipe out the units, and you come in with bigger units? What happens? Less apartments. And that's a problem. It's not a problem because I say it's a problem, it's a big problem because you guys said it was a problem. You guys said, and there are many public housing sites, and I've done this many, many times over the last 3 decades, where the goal is to reduce density. Because what we want to do is we want to go from 192 to 100 units because it gives us a breathing room we need to do. But day one, residents of Holland Gardens said, no, that's not what we want. We're a family, we're a community here. The connections of people and the connections of the people here to this place was most important. So one of the highest goals that we heard, meeting 1, we heard at meeting 2, I'm seeing heads nodding, so I'm hearing at meeting 3, is we want to be able to support everybody who lives at Holland Gardens today. We want them to be able to live at Holland Gardens tomorrow.
Okay, since we're talking about making the apartments bigger, couldn't you build more units on top of the building? Make more.
Okay. So you're talking about expanding upward, and you could, but I would say that going up on the existing buildings, there are some fundamental problems with that. Number one is what was talked about before. They're not designed to go up. Number two, when you go up, you need elevators. Where's the elevator going to go? And you need more, there's a lot of fundamental things to the way the existing buildings are laid out that are not really conducive to going up. But that's not a bad idea, because if you're going to make the units bigger, and we may want to go up, you could do something, and this is what we call the lower density. This is 4 stories. You probably all recognize that building. That's one of the newer buildings at Gloria Robinson Home. Gloria Robinson used to be 16-story high-rise towers. Gloria Robinson, when it was called A. Harry Moore, one of the goals there was to reduce density and come back in with something like this. Some of these buildings do have elevators. So that is an approach to density. But what it requires is just what it required at Gloria Robinson. Requires a clean slate to work with. You're not working with the existing bones of the building. So the first 2 things we talked about was fix what's broken. The other was gut rehab, but there would be a certain loss of number of units if you're doing gut rehab with what's here. If, however, you start thinking about, let's not rehab, let's build new, then there are basically 3 approaches to building new. And we're gonna go through them real quick, and then we're gonna come back and start filling this thing out and comparing them. One approach is basically build new, but keep it low, keep it kind of like what's here. What's here now, we got 3, 4-story buildings, we can do it in 3, 4-story buildings. And, you know, that could yield approximately the same number of units as we have now. It would get you some ADA compliant accessible units. There are some additional community space. Some of the trade-offs that you have is you're gonna wind up taking up more of the site. More of the property that Holland Gardens occupies is gonna be occupied by building footprints. Because we're trying to do bigger and better, but even as we make buildings bigger and better, we can't make the ground bigger and better. The ground is what it is. You know, the streets are where they are. So we all have to fit it there. So some of the things that we have in terms of the outside spaces are gonna get squeezed down. And parking, you know, parking, cars compete for ground space, just like buildings do. So with a limited amount of ground space, an approach like this is viable, but it's not gonna hit some of the goals that you have. Next. So you could go a little bit higher. If you go a little bit higher, then you can get a little bit more compact and leave some more room on the ground. You go higher, you could even get possibly you could get certainly all the units that are here, but you could maybe even do more units that are here. When you do something like this, a building like this now could have shared lobbies. It can have some non-residential retail uses on the ground floor. It can possibly even accommodate structured parking. When I say structured parking, that means a garage. And that does not mean that you pay to park in the garage. That means a parking garage that this building could have behind it, hidden behind it, it could have a parking garage where you come in and you securely park your vehicles. And it can that way, you can actually increase the number of cars per unit. So, you know, you could get, you know, half a car per unit. Right now you have a quarter of a car per unit,
Yes.
one car for every 4 units. You could do it 1 for 2, or you could do it 1 for 3. In any case, it could be designated parking for Holland Gardens. And you could, the last one. The last one is to just say, you know what, and quite honestly, this is the only, in all the time I've been doing this, this is the only property I've ever shown a slide like this. This is a high rise. Well, why do I say a high rise? Because Holland Gardens, in some ways, not just the ways that you think of living here, but because of where it is, Holland Gardens is unique in all the public housing authorities I've ever worked with. It's unique because something like this is actually possible. Because of where it is, right? Look, if that wasn't possible, Soho Loss wouldn't exist. If that wasn't possible, most of Hoboken wouldn't exist. Most of Newport wouldn't exist if that wasn't possible here. So the question then is, okay, well, what do we gain and what do we lose? Well, some of the things that could be gained is a building like that obviously needs a parking garage to support it. So parking is dealt with. A building like that has an abundance usually of common space and amenities. So some of those things that we talked about priority-wise, not just the number 1 priority of laundry and community room, but the number 2 priority of senior center, the number 3 priority of the daycare center, the number 4 priority of fitness room. Yeah.
when you build to a certain scale, you have the ability to get more. That's not easy to do. Actually, none of these are easy to do. But if we look to build to a certain scale, you can get more of some of the things that you talked about. Well, I think it was might have been the first one, the very first meeting. Actually, it was before we started. I came to a meeting with the resident council and the housing authority on Saturday, January, and somebody was saying, we'd like a bus. The bus doesn't stop here anymore, but the people across the street have a shuttle. Why can't we have a shuttle? Why can't we use that? Well, you can't use their shuttle because that's private. It's not a public bus. The housing authority can't run a shuttle bus. That's against HUD's rules. If you remember the first meeting, I told you, I would never lie to you and tell you that you can have something that you can't have. But I know that a housing authority is not allowed to run a shuttle bus. They're a housing authority, they're not a transportation service. So why can they do it? They can do it because they've got people that, and paying the rent, they can afford to do it. One of the things that, if together you want us to look at doing something like this, just like they could have theirs, you could possibly have yours. You can have your own shuttle. You don't have to necessarily rely on New Jersey Transit. Even if it's a shuttle just to the shopping center, on a regular loop. That's one of the things that I heard even before this process started. So high density new construction gets you an awful lot of things. So what does it not get you? It certainly gets you plenty of units for everybody who's currently here at Holland Gardens to remain here. What it does, and the thing that you have to wrestle with, is it's not just you. It's you and other people. Because that's not 192 units. That's a lot more than that. Right now, you've got a lot more than that across the street. A lot more than that across the street does not help you. You know this. It doesn't help you. If we choose to do and explore going that route here at Holland Gardens, it's what's happening in the neighborhood anyway. And you need to think about, okay, how do we retain our identity and our community, but also use the unique energy of this location, which is really different than any place else. How can we use that to get something that no other public housing site ever has? That's why this is so unique. And that's why I've never shown a slide like this to any other public housing. So, you ready?
It looks like the building on Exchange Place.
What's that?
It looks like that building on Exchange Place, where you get up in the library. Close to Exchange.
That particular building is not Exchange Place. This is just an example. I know this one's in New Brunswick. Yes. Is there green space? What about the children? There's a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways to look at that. In high rises or in denser communities. Waiting for a second. In denser communities, green space can be dealt with a couple different ways. Number one, you deal with it some at the ground level, because as you go higher, you may not need as much footprint on the ground. But also, and if you look at some of these other buildings, very often there are green spaces that are up high. And think about some of the other things that have been talked about. The quality of air, especially down low, the quality of the air in this neighborhood. It's not great. The quality of air, if you're 5 stories up, if it's green and it's a good playground, this is what happens. I mean, you look at Newport, you look at some of these other places, most of their green space, most of their playgrounds, even daycares are up on higher levels. and you don't have cars whipping by and things like that, and they've got the green space, they've got the playgrounds, they've got the exposure to light, air, and sun and things like that. It just isn't on the ground floor. Why? Because in cities and urban areas, everything is competing for the same bit of ground. So it can also be that there are other parks, and that's where some of the connections are. You know, I do know that there's a park plan just on the other side of Soho Lofts.
That actually is for younger children, and it's only going to be an half an acre.
It's only,
Half an acre.
Or an acre or half an acre. It's very small, it's for younger children.
okay,
So I was like, I'm planning for a meeting for that.
okay.
Well, I don't know, I got, of course, the street, the 16th Street Park, I got that declared as a green space when I started doing the plan. We trying to get it back to being a park. It looks like a lot.
So, we're not proposing particular solutions tonight, we're talking about the different things. But ultimately, regardless of which approaches we choose to explore, green space for kids, green space and for all the residents becomes a high priority. And it's one of the things that we
It actually shows up there all the time.
Okay. So we're going to do this pretty quickly because every time we've been very respectful of your time. We always start on time at 6 o'clock. We always end on time at 7:30. But with this in mind, these are really the key things. So do you want to talk or do you want to mark? Okay.
Unless you
She's
want
gonna mark it up in a thought. All right. And you've got your own versions of this. What we do here is going to be posted on the website. The housing authority is going to get it. But if you want to mark yourselves, that's fine, but certainly you can follow along. So, in terms of scenario one is with some form of rehabilitation. At the top, it's fundamental design and development priorities. Can we get one-to-one unit replacement with rehabilitation? Can we get one? Can we replace all the units if we rehab what's here?
based on what we just talked about, that we probably will lose a few units, at least for them to have accessibility. There is a likelihood that we wouldn't be able to come exactly with 192 units.
So we're gonna lose some. Even with the rehab, we're gonna lose some. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Yeah, with the space that you're talking about, the, spending the space, with the space, the reason that you're not gonna have enough units if you're gonna expand the space.
Right.
Correct. So Claudia's gonna put an X on that. Okay. If we rehab it, can we get handicap accessible units? Yes, we can. In fact, we would be required to do that. So that would be something that it could do. ADA compliance, that means Americans with Disabilities Act. We would, again, that is something that we would have to do because it's required by the law. So resident priority on neighborhood. Would everybody be able to stay in the neighborhood? If we don't bring back 192 units, can everybody stay in the neighborhood? No. Will we get better housing? Will the housing be better?
Yes.
It will be better because it will be fixed, okay? Will we get better transportation in a rehab type of thing?
That doesn't matter.
Not really, because that is a city, that's an external thing, that is not something that can be controlled through a rehab process, so that's a no. Are there spaces for children? Well, there are spaces for children that we have today, so yes, there will be some spaces for children. Is there a laundromat? Is there a laundromat here today?
No.
There will probably not be a laundromat here unless we sacrifice something even more. So that will probably be enough. Will the street, will it be safer? Probably improve lighting and things like that. Let's give give them the benefit of the doubt saying that it could be safe. Is there any room for retail?
On the safer, just define safer.
Yeah, because it's already safe.
Well, that had to do with safer streets and being able to walk around. And in a rehab situation, I'm sure the lighting and things like that would be improved, so there would probably be, it was already considered to be pretty safe.
Right, yeah.
But that would also be, I would think, enhanced.
I just want to clarify.
Okay? Retail, is there any room for retail if we're renovating? No. And we're gonna try and go quicker. Parking, we gonna be able to fix parking? Not with rehab. Fitness room, laundry room, community space for senior residents. Elevators, daycare, these are all bigger and better things. If we're renovating, are we getting bigger and better? We might be getting better in terms of the housing, the apartment itself, but most of those are gonna be no.
Whereas children stay because we already have that.
Right? Computer center, community garden, daycare, most of that category is gonna be a no. So building and unit amenities, can we make unit size and layout, can we make them bigger?
No.
No. Air conditioning,
Yes.
yeah, we could probably change the systems and do air conditioning. Can we get more than one bathroom per unit?
No.
Can you make the units bigger?
No.
If you're in renovating what's here, you're probably not making the units bigger. If you're
Just renovate the space that you have.
correct, that's repairing what you've got.
Okay.
What's next? More than one bathroom per unit.
No.
Yeah, there's no room for another closet, there's no room for a bathroom. Individual HVAC systems, probably, because that would go to fixing the infrastructure. So just like you would have air conditioning, you could probably have your own heat. Private decks and balconies, no. Washer, dryer. Option to stay in my home if I have a disability. Well, there are gonna be a few, typically the HUD rule is 5%. What's 5% of, 5% of that, 192, that's, 10 units. It's 10 units. So 10 people could check off yes, if they had a disability.
Yeah, that's right.
But the other 182 are out of luck. I would think that would be a no. It just, as a broad brush, that would be a no. What's the next one? Dishwasher, microwave?
Yes.
That's a possibility to maybe fit some of that into the existing space.
Take a cavity.
Systems and infrastructure. This one talks about the aging infrastructure, the impact of flooding, the long-term resilience and green. So if we're fixing the buildings that are here, are you gonna fix anything having to do with the flooding?
That's more or less the city, isn't it? City responsibility, somewhat?
The city could be, there could be other people responsible, but if you're fixing the buildings that are here, they're staying at the same temperature. So they're still in some danger of the flooding issues. And, I mean, if you have another superstorm Sandy or worse, and God forbid we have something that like's happening out in the Midwest. I don't know if you've seen that. This place is.
No, it's not. It's not the street at all.
Just the street.
It's just the street.
But in general, the overall infrastructure isn't going to be really addressed. Environmental, address lead, paint, asbestos. We would have to, if we're renovating, we would have to make sure that renovations would be lead free, minimize noise, and the indoor air quality. Indoor air quality may improve somewhat because you'll have air conditioning, and you might be able to in the summertime keep your windows closed. But effectively, if currently where your apartments are, And breathing fresh air is not is something that you struggle with. You know, fixing what's here isn't going to change where you are in relationship to the fumes in the streets. So I would say that that's probably enough. Sustainability and energy efficiency. Yeah, we can probably do things that are better in terms of energy efficiency. We probably can't do much with the building envelope because the bricks are what the bricks are. But again, I think you probably have 2 greens and a red on that. So if you just look at renovation, and this list are the things that have been said that we would like to see these things to make our community better. It's hitting a few things, but it's not hitting a lot.
Which is more feasible at this point, should we have, based on what we all want, or to,
Well, let's look at the next one. We're gonna do this again. Let's do scenario. That took us exactly 5 minutes, which is perfect, because we can do all of these in 5 minutes. All right. So you got the hang of this? So we're gonna go quickly. So the second one is low-rise new construction. We're not renovating anymore, so we're building new. So think about building things new, and you're no longer confined to the buildings that exist now. So can we get one-to-one unit replacement? Yes, we can get one-to-one. And so what we're now going to do is I want you to think in all 3 categories: low, medium, and big. Okay, that'll help us go a little quicker because now we're talking about new construction. Before we do that, we're going to take one question.
You also just give the approximate time that people would have to be out of their units to have each of these scenarios done?
Okay, the question was, if you didn't hear it, was what's the approximate time to be out of the units to have each of these done? The answer is, the overall answer is different. Because certainly a larger building takes longer to build than a smaller building. But I'm going to tell you this, regardless of which of these 4, whether you're building new or even renovating, the scope of these renovations cannot be done while people live in the units. They simply cannot. So there's going to be some temporary relocation. How long that is, that will probably differ depending on which of these. You know, a high-rise building can take a couple of years to build. But Gloria Robinson, for example, because of the way that was done, that's low-rise, but that had to be done in 4 steps. And that took 6 or 7 years to complete the whole thing. Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. Gloria Robinson is about 240, 250 units. Somewhere in there. So
it's not much of a difference?
So it's not that much bigger than here. Holland Robinson currently is only 240, 250 units, something along those lines.
Okay.
But that had to be done in 4 separate steps. Each one of those steps took about 1.5 years to do before the whole thing was done.
Because why? People wasn't moving out, or because that's just the way the process went?
At that time, and the question was, why did it have to take that long? One of the next things that this process is, once we know what the goal is, we have to figure out how to get there, and that means money.
Okay.
And at the time that we did Gloria Robinson, the way the money was available, it could only do so many units at a time, maybe like 80 units at a time, and every year we tried to get more and more and more. So that's why it stretched out that long.
Okay.
Let me ask you something, did they clear out the entire project at one time, or did they just clear out the?
That was cleared out all at one time. Duncan was cleared out at one time. Because remember that.
No. Although it was like 2 buildings, because I was on that side.
Well, it was consolidated everything done in phases. But I don't think you had people actually living in the tower while the first phase was built.
As first phase, as the phase was no phase was complete before relocation was ended.
For the next phase.
Right, but it was done over the course, I want to say about 3 years.
People moved right out of the last hour straight into the first.
Correct.
So again, I want to be respectful of your time and make sure that we do so. If we can get one-to-one replacement in low rise, we can certainly get it in mid-rise, rise, and high rise because that's more, right? So can we get handicap compliance? Can we get handicap units in new construction? Absolutely, because everything that's built these days has to be handicapped. The next one, the ADA compliance is correct as well. So resident priorities. Does that allow everybody to stay in the neighborhood? If you're doing 192 units for Holland Gardens residents, whether it's just 192 or something more than that, you have enough units for everybody to stay in the neighborhood. Right?
Yes.
Agree all the way across.
3 on down, you can check them all.
Well, not all of them. No, but not all of them. Let's make sure that this is something that really does need to. I know where you're going. I know where you're going. So, is it going to be better? Is it better housing? Is it better housing? Are you going to have better transit? Are you going to have better transit? Okay. There's only one option here. Identity number 4, because, and I'm not making this up, why do I say that? Because it exists across the street. It exists across the street. It does not exist in Gloria Robinson, so we know that it doesn't happen at the lower density. But it can exist on scenario 4, but the others it can't. So not everything can be green all the way across. I'm gonna make a believer out of you yet. Spaces for children. Can we have spaces for children in low, medium, and high density? Yes. Can we have a laundromat?
Yes.
We could. Would we want a laundromat if we could have laundry in the units?
But then you would have the issue of flooding in there.
Hang on, maybe you got a question.
Because it increases.
What's that?
The community space increases.
The community space will certainly, the amount of space that you can create for the community, the program, that will increase in all of these. And frankly, the more that you build, the more space you can create. Frankly, the more that you build, the more space you want to create. You can have more people there. So I'm not sure where that is on the list. Which one did I miss? Safer streets. Will the streets be safer?
No, it's not no. You
I don't know that they'll be less safe.
But one of the things you have for safer streets is that if the ground floor has a lot of activities, not only apartments, but if you have stores and if you have community spaces and things like that, that means you have a lot more activity on the street and a lot more people walking on the street, which makes the neighborhood in general feel safer because you have a lot more activity around you. You don't have, you don't have just like empty streets, especially at night. If you have a laundromat, and if you have a fitness room, and you have a lot of activity happening, the likelihood of better safety conditions in the neighborhood is much higher in general.
Okay, so parking. Of these scenarios, which gives you the most opportunity for parking? Probably 4 is gonna require the most, is gonna have structured parking. 3 is probably has structured parking as well. 2, which is low density, you can't afford to do low density and structured parking. So parking is also going to be a little bit squeezed. So I'd say parking would probably be not in low density. Fitness room, laundry room, community space, elevators, daycare, play areas for children. All of those kinds of extra spaces. While they'll all scale, certainly the high density one will have the most of that. There will be some, and there will be more than what you have here, even at the low density. Even at the low density, you have something like Gloria Robinson has about twice what you have here, even though you've got about the same population. So most of that's going to be green. And I'm sorry that fast because we are running out of time. Building and unit amenities. Unit size and layout. Bigger and better if we're building new. Yes. Air conditioning. Can we have more than one bathroom? You probably can. I would say though, depending on that's one that we may come back with when we really look at the nuts and bolts of these, because certain kinds of funding vehicles restrict how big your unit can be. Like HMFA has standards. They also tell you that you can have 1.5 baths in a 3-bedroom, but you're not allowed to have 1.5 baths in a 2-bedroom. That said, if we go to some of the larger density ones, that opens up the ability to go beyond just housing mortgage finance agency standards. So some of those might be restricted on scenario 2, but 3 and 4 might open up. Individual heating and air conditioning. Yes. Private decks and balconies.
Yes, for the last one.
Maybe.
On the last.
I mean, when you look at the high rises around, when you look at the mid rises around, some of them do have balconies. A lot of them don't. Even right across the highway, there are 2 buildings that are brand new that look, I think, refracted. They look like warehouses. They're up on the embankment. But they don't have balconies. They're brand new, but they don't have balconies. So, but there are some that do have balconies or roof terraces. So, some of them could. So you might want to just put like a horizontal line in there because on the balcony wall. Washer and dryer in the unit. If you're doing the brand new, you could do washers and dryers in the units. We've done that before. They're in many of the other affordable housing projects in the The option to stay in my home if I have a disability. Well, if everything has an elevator and everything is a flat apartment and it's designed for ADA, even though not everyone will be fully accessible to be, wheel under the sink, they can be adaptable. So in new construction, the ability to stay in your home is built into it.
Steve, this is a question on the ADA. We talked about how it's usually at the lower density, 5%. Right,
Yes.
is it same across the board?
Yes, typically what we call the fully accessible units are typically 5%. But when you do go to buildings that have elevators, when you get to the densities, even at the scenario 3 or 4, any apartment unit in a building that's served by an elevator has to be designed to be adaptable. So even though it's not fully accessible, it may not have all the grab bars and things like that, they want. If 10 years after you move in, you find that you have an accident, you need a grab bar, it's easy to put them in. They're designed for that so that you don't have to move. It can be adapted without you moving. That's the point that we were trying to make. Dishwasher, microwave, I think if we're building it, we can put a dishwasher and a microwave. This next section is pretty interesting. Systems and infrastructure. That has to do with the flooding and some of the fundamental utilities in this area. If you're doing the low rise, which is basically a newer version of the intensity that you have here, you're probably not a whole lot higher out of your floodplain. And you probably do not have the ability to do the things that you can't do because you're waiting for the city to do. Right? But when you start going to larger development, what often happens is larger developments have to upgrade their infrastructure. So certainly 4, possibly 3 would bring enough resources to the table to really fundamentally change some of the infrastructure there.
Is the possibility of coming back into your pay?
Yes.
Is there a possibility that coming back in here and pay gas and electric? That I'm not gonna say there's not that possibility, that there could well be, because
That is a possibility, certainly that's more than likely to happen, but then you also get utility allowance. Because if you have a formula rent, you're on formula, it doesn't apply to residents that are above, that are paying the flat rent. But on the formula rent side, you definitely get a utility allowance.
All right, let's finish up the list here real quick. One category on environmental, lead, asbestos, noise, and air quality. So certainly the lead asbestos would be dealt with in any kind of new construction. Noise and air quality is scenario 2, where you're still roughly the same size buildings as you are now. Those issues will still probably be. When you go a little bit higher, those issues tend to go away, because if you're living now 5 stories above or higher than the street, you're not experiencing the same kind of noise. You're not experiencing the same kind of air quality. So you probably have a couple of reds under 2 and greens on the other. And the last category is sustainability and energy efficiency. All of those in new construction, regardless of whether it's big or small, we're going to hit all of those. So as we wrap up tonight, and maybe I'll let you have the last word in just a minute. I know how much you love that. But as we wrap up tonight, and we're going to document this and send it back to the housing authority. It's going to be up. But when we look at this, and when we come back next time and start to see what these kinds of things look like on Holland Gardens, everybody can look at that list and say, we're not getting the things that we want in renovation. We're just not. Okay.
Even though if you plan on building bigger, the apartments are not gonna be 192 because of the space that is taken up. So it's gonna have lesser apartments.
The apartments would be the same size, but they would up. The thing that would happen though is in both scenarios 3 and 4, there will be more than 192 apartments here. Because to do those, you need a critical mass of other people also living there. Some of them may also be, affordable rent. They might be people in the workforce. Some of them might be full market rate. Why do I say that? Because full market rate can help pay for things like the transit that you want. And it can help pay for a lot of things that you can't get in the rehab.
But now you're talking full market rate is gonna put some of these people out of the wall.
It's not gonna put anybody who's currently at Holland Gardens out of the ballpark. So But think of it this way.
The first 192 are for you.
And that's an aspect that the housing authority is going to go more into, because I know that that's something that you might think it's, oh, that sounds good, but I wonder. But that's where Vivian and the housing authority need to come back and give you we can show you what it could look like and what it could feel like. And that's what we're gonna come, that's the next meeting. Next meeting is not checklist, next meeting is going to be looking at potential scenarios. So don't miss the next one. I expect you here. Okay. So we're definitely gonna explore 3 and 4 because they both give you the most of what you want. If we have time, we'll look at 3 as well. But we're definitely gonna look at 2 as well. But we're definitely gonna look at 3 and 4.
I wanna thank everybody in this room. This was incredible work tonight, and I appreciate that. I know there are a lot of questions, but we can only do this by working through the options together. You have the commitment from the housing authority. We put a lot of time and effort to try to explain, but as Steve has shared, the next conversation, and probably the one after that, is we have to look at 2 things: HUD regulation and financing options. Nothing happens without money, and we also have to have HUD approval of whatever plan we put together. So when people say, well, a decision's already been made, those decisions, we have regulatory obligations in terms of how we present them, and HUD has to approve them. We don't simply have the freedom to just do whatever we like. So we have to, you know how we started? The big questions. What do you like about your neighborhood? Then we had the different carols and stations that we went to. Today, we did a lot of work to prioritize. At the next meeting, we're going to be doing a version of budgeting and looking at the guidelines and seeing what might be feasible. And that might take even more than one other meeting. We might be talking about that for the next 2 meetings. So thank everybody. We really appreciate your input. I want to thank Steve and Claudia for all of their hard work. And I just want to, I know Councilman Solomon introduced himself, but I want to thank him also for joining us.
If your answer passes, I hope you can make it.
Well, thank you, Hamilton Park Association, for coming.
Oh,